great to be here. Although I have to say, I don't really know what here means right now. Wherever we are, wherever you are, thank you for sitting in front of your screen so we can try to do something collectively. I guess that in some ways is what I want to talk to you about today. This theme of what it means for us to reconnect and re-engage each other, even in real life, as we move into this next stage of life. And some of you I've probably spoken to or met before. As you might know, a few years ago, I wrote a book called Palaces for the People, which is about this idea I call social infrastructure, the physical places that shape our interactions. And when the pandemic hit, I was just in the midst of traveling around to libraries and community centers and theaters around the country talking about how we could build better places to connect with each other, and gaining some momentum. It was kind of an exciting moment. It felt like back in 2018, 2019, we were really beginning to recognize just how important it is to physically be together, about all the virtues of places like libraries that play such pivotal roles in our local lives, binding us together, of helping us participate in the everyday life of democracy and culture. And back in 2019, I thought we were really heading for a very good place. And of course, then in early 2020, everything shifted. And it was a sudden stop to our collective life. And I know that each one of us here today has experienced that and is still dealing with these questions about, well, what comes next? But to begin, I just want to call attention to this strange thing that happened in early 2020 when we were told, first by the World Health Organization and then by our own governments, what we needed to do to survive this pandemic was stay socially distanced. I'm sure that you all got that message at some point. That the idea was that the key to surviving a pandemic was to socially distance ourselves from the people around us. And when I heard that concept, I immediately understood the idea. I got the intention. I knew what the health officials were trying to tell us, which is to regard each other more carefully. But I also knew right away that social distancing was just about the worst idea. It was the very opposite of what we needed because, when you're in a pandemic situation, as we've learned in this past year, it's not actually our social proximity to other people that makes a difference between, whether we pass on the infection and stay healthy or not, or not. What really affects our well-being is our physical distance, right? It's our physical proximity. It's if I'm socially close to someone, it doesn't matter as long as if I'm not sneezing or coughing or anywhere near them. And so I realized, the truth was, from the beginning of the pandemic, what we needed was something more like social solidarity, some real way of thinking more carefully and considerately about each other. Because the truth is, when you're in a dangerous situation, and unfortunately, I think we're still in a dangerous situation now, whether the issue is COVID or democracy, but when you're in an emergency, the thing you need to do is take into consideration how what you do is going to affect the life and well-being of people around you. And so in a way, there's nothing like the past year that has taught us the lesson of the extent to which our fates are linked, the extent to which solidarity is really what we need. And you can think about that, right? If you live in a world where there's strong social solidarity, what that means is you have things like a good education policy. And so your neighbors can tell the difference between a novel coronavirus that's potentially lethal and an ordinary flu. And if they can tell the difference, then they know, hey, this is a time when I need to stay physically apart from my neighbors, stay physically apart from people I might otherwise work with. But socially, I want to check in on them and make sure they're okay. Or if you live in a society where there's social solidarity, maybe that gets reflected in your labor practices and your labor policies. And so you make rules that say, if you're a worker and you work in the restaurant industry or the retail industry, if you're sick and you can't come into work, you should call in and you won't lose your job, and maybe you'll even get paid. And in societies that offer that kind of protection, people, when they're sick, don't come into work. But in a country like the United States, when we haven't done that historically, sick people, even during a pandemic, will come to work and get their coworkers sick as well. And that's a failure to have social solidarity. And so what I was thinking from the beginning of the pandemic was that the real message needed to have been physical distance, social solidarity, not social distance, physical distance and social solidarity. That's how we got through when we figured things out. That's how we got through this crisis. And now we have spent the better part of a year physically distant, and unfortunately, in some cases, socially distant as well. And the question for us is, how do we reconnect and how do we rebuild? And what I wanted to do today is talk to you about this moment we're in, where it does feel like here in the United States, at least, things are beginning to get a little bit better. Things are beginning to open up. I'm speaking to you right now from New York City, and it's been a big time here because the libraries have just reopened. They've, not just doing curbside service, but physically allowing people to come in again, and it's like thrilling, and it's also terrifying. And you can hear New York City in the background for those of you who are not here right now. The city is telling us that it's back, and we have to get over the hump and figure out how we can actually be together again. And the argument of this book I wrote is that our ability to be together matters. It is in some ways the most important thing for an open society and a democratic culture. We need to be able to connect not just remotely, not just on Zoom and FaceTime and Skype. We need to be able to bridge our divisions face to face in real life. We need to be able to build things together. We need to find ways to cooperate together. In some ways, the places where we make our lives are the places where we learn how to do that kind of work. One thing that's so important to me about the library every day is you get to see all these people come in and get their first library cards. And I don't know how many of you missed that experience if you work in a library, but there's this amazing thing that happens in libraries on a daily basis. It's not just that people come to get books. It's that people come and they get their first library card. And that card is, I'm sure many of you have seen, is for many young people the first time in their lives that they get recognized as members of a society. They get a card that identifies them as a person with the rights to cultural citizenship, to have access to their heritage as people in the society, regardless of their age or their race or their economic status or even their formal citizenship status. That library card becomes the moment where they learn that they are part of something, and that something recognizes them, and that they have some ability to join the cultural conversation that has been going on for forever. And it dignifies them by letting them in. And when you get that card, I can't tell you all the times I saw young people get that first card and realize, not only they've been recognized, but also now that they have taken on a responsibility, right? Because when you get that card, you don't just have to remember to keep that card and not lose it. You also know that if you take out a book, you have to take care of that book. You have to make sure that book doesn't get the pages torn. You have to make sure that you don't write in the book. You have to return that book. And that's because if you've just taken out Harry Potter, you need to know that if you return it on time, someone else in your community is also going to get to read that book. They're going to have a chance to read it when you're done. And maybe even more importantly for you at that moment, when you finish the first Harry Potter and you want to get the second Harry Potter, or the first Curious George and you want the second Curious George, you're not going to have access to that second book unless another person in your community takes care of it and returns it on time as well. So you learn not just about your rights, but also about your responsibilities to other people. And it's that feeling that connects us to something like a community, to something like civil society, to something like democracy. And all of these things become connected. So the debate about, whether the library, how do we come back and where do we go? It couldn't be more consequential. Because of course, we're living on this planet at a time where everything is up for grabs. We don't know about the future of our species. We don't know about the short-term fate of our democratic experiment. And while many people here on this Zoom meeting or wherever it is that we are today are probably excited about the prospect of an infrastructure bill and a reinvestment in public works. There are probably many of us who are here who are also worried about what happens in 2 years or 4 years or 8 years. It feels like we are teetering on the brink. But of what? We don't know. And at moments like this, it's so important that we get off of our screens, right? It's so important that we not depend on Facebook to be our social infrastructure, or Zoom to be our social infrastructure, or Skype to be our social infrastructure. We need to learn how to re-engage each other and recommit to those bedrock principles that made open societies possible. And that means shoring up the places that make us feel secure and comfortable and confident that we're part of something that's bigger than ourselves and our screen. And when I survey the landscape in this country, I can't find many places that are more important for that role than the library, which means that the work that you do on a daily basis is sacred work, right? It's special not just because the library is a good place to get information, but sacred in the sense that it stands for and exemplifies something that we all need, right? The spirit of openness, of tolerance, of learning, of understanding, of physically engaging each other to remind ourselves that we are here for some greater purpose. And I can't think of a time in my life when that has been more urgent. I wrote an op-ed a few weeks ago, I should call it a guest essay now, in the New York Times, out of my concern that as bold as the ideas are coming out of Washington, D.C. these days, as exciting as it is to see an infrastructure plan and an investment in America, we've yet to see the federal government make the kind of commitment to social infrastructure, these physical places, including libraries, that we're going to need to rebuild in coming years. I haven't seen that commitment yet. And I worry about our capacity to come back in the absence of a commitment to those public places. Because right now we're learning to socialize in bubbles. In New York, again, where I live, but in other cities I've seen in the last year as well, the way to come back has been to be outside or maybe go in a restaurant and enter into one of those little igloos that's, a private, comfortable space for people who can afford the price of admission and who can kind of hunker down with people who are like them. And that might work on an interim basis. That might be an okay emergency measure to get us back in. But the only way to come back from this is to burst the bubble, right? To blow it open, and to find a way to reassemble our public life. And I wish I had all the answers and I could give you the blueprint for exactly how you do that. I don't know all the ways in which we're going to have to build and invest. I can't give you the full catalog of the places that we're going to need to rebuild to recover. But I do know that we won't reassemble and achieve that social proximity and maybe even physical proximity as well, unless we come up with a strategy for supporting those physical places. And for me, as we try to regain some sense of normalcy and possibility, I look for the best exemplars we have of collective life. And I'm not so glib and naive as to think that, if we could just build a better library in every community or build new libraries, we're going to repair democracy. I wish it were that easy. I'm not going to argue that. But I will say that as we start to rebuild, there's probably no better place to begin. There's no better site. There's no better public works project. There's no better social infrastructure that expresses who we are and what we want to be than the library. And so I want to end today by thanking you for the work you've done over the last year in particular. I know it's been a year full of challenges, but we got here. And I have seen library systems across the country do amazing things to continue to support their patrons, and not just in reading, but also being part of the democratic process, registering people to vote, helping people to vote, helping people deal with complicated problems that they wanted to debate out in real time, and move on with the hard work of being a cultural citizen. Thank you for helping us to get here. Thank goodness that that proposal that the economists writing in Forbes a few years ago came up with, that we knock down all libraries and replace them with Amazon stores. Thank goodness that didn't happen. I'm grateful that we've had you and your labor and support, and I can't wait to see you in your library very soon. So have a terrific conference, and thank you very much.